The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
St. Louis County Executive Steve Stenger believes his last 4 years in office have brought change and accomplishments. His adversaries on the St. Louis County Council and elsewhere disagree. But on the latest edition of Politically Speaking, we talked to the Democratic Chief Executive about why he deserves to be reelected and why he's a better choice for Democrats than Mark Mantovani. So let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really, really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me after several days in Jefferson City.
Actually, a week and a half in Jefferson City with just a little break to do my nails. This is Joe Mannies.
And joining us, I think, for the fourth time, the most powerful local elected official in the region.
Yes, I would say.
I don't know if you want to compare yourself to the Jackson County executive, but I would say you're one of the most powerful local officials in the world.
I don't think of myself in those terms at all. I'm the youngest of four kids.
Yeah.
So I think of myself as the baby.
The baby. And by the way, what's your name?
Well, Steve Stenger. My family called me Stevie. So that tells you anything.
This is the St. Louis County executive. He's a Democrat. St. Louis County is the state's largest county by far.
Hence the reason for my nice designation to you. By the way, this is the first time all three of us are St. Louis County residents because I have now moved to the county. So what you do now actually affects me. So it's great.
Well, that's good to know that you're a constituent. I think you seem like a very reasonable-minded person.
Now you're just going to do my bidding from now since I am an evil genius. But
yeah, I live in Webster where they're all crazies.
But the reason we wanted to have you on again, we had your Democratic opponent, Mark Mantovani, on, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think
maybe a month
ago. And beyond just going tit for tat, we also want you to provide voters of St. Louis County the reason that you should deserve another term. Sure. So I'm going to give that opportunity to you before we pepper you with hard-hitting questions of just explaining why you're running for a second term and what you want to accomplish in another 4 years.
You know, that's really an easy question to answer for me, the first part of, why am I running? Because it's the same reason why I ran for county council when I ran, and I represented the 6th district, which is all of South County. I started a career in public service because I wanted to make my community better, and that it was just basic and that simple, and that's why I'm running again. And I think if you look at the results that we have achieved over the last 3.5 years, I think that our first term as county executive is a real standout in the history of St. Louis County. I'd start first by talking about the prescription drug monitoring database that we began just one short year ago, and we already have 80% of the state's population now participating in this program, meaning that counties making up 80% of the population have joined our program. We started this program because we found ourselves in the middle of an opioid epidemic. We have lost quite literally thousands of people in our region to the opioid epidemic, and we needed to do something because the state wouldn't act. So I think we thought innovatively, and we began a local program that was joinable by other jurisdictions, and we encouraged those other jurisdictions to join, which required leadership and also coordination and cooperation among those other jurisdictions. So we now, as I said, have 80% of the state's population covered by that. Another transformational, just really a transformational matter that we and proposal that we were able to bring forward was Proposition P. And Proposition P is going to provide a much needed funding source for decades for police in our community. And when you think about what you want your community to look like over the next few decades, you of course want St. Louis County and our region to be a safe place and a place where police are interacting with our communities, and they're doing so with a relationship of trust and safety. So Proposition P does just that. The things that we promised are the things that we're delivering with respect to Proposition P, which of course was a half-cent sales tax that is police and public safety related. We're adding over 100 police officers to our St. Louis County streets, 2 officers to a police car. We're increasing diversity in police ranks. We're improving training, and we're adding more equipment like body cameras and dash cams. The reason why the number of police officers are so important is we're able to do community policing. When I came into office, we came into office at a point where perhaps the relationship between the police and our communities had never been so stressed, in the history of St. Louis County. And I think that Proposition P provides, of course, for community safety. It provides for officer safety. It also provided for higher wages so we can retain the best officers and attract the best officers. And that's really important for building trust in our communities, because with 2 officers to a vehicle, officers are able to take part in community policing, which means officers are making their way into the community, getting to know the individuals that they are policing and keeping safe. And a much stronger bond is built between our police department and our police officers and the communities that they represent. You also have to look at economic development since I've taken office. And we have brought in over $5 billion. I think it's approximately $5.7 billion in economic activity, private investment in our community.
And how much of the Centene building constitutes that? Probably like a fifth, right?
It's about $772 million. And if you run down just a brief list of the things that we've been able to bring forward, you're talking about Centene, which is, as we said, $772 million. Pfizer, which is about $200 million. A Monsanto campus that's being enhanced. The NGA is in the city. That doesn't count into that $5 billion, but we were able to work very closely with the city to have the NGA come here, which does impact St. Louis County. I just don't have that counted in our numbers.
Absolutely.
We have a Blues facility that is underway. That's going to be a training facility for the Blues, as well as, and the majority of which is actually public ice for use by the public. Youth soccer fields in Creve Coeur, worldwide technology. Did a massive expansion out in West County. We've had multiple expansions out in North Park, which is North County. And then we've redeveloped we're in the process of redeveloping Jamestown Mall, and we redeveloped Northwest Plaza and turned that into really an economic engine for the region. Another historic thing that we did was our disparity study. First thing, in the first year, we commissioned a disparity study. And that disparity study was completed last year, gathered data for years in St. Louis County, completed that study, and that study led to our first minority inclusion bill. So we had our first disparity study and our first minority inclusion bill all within my first term, and that had never been done before.
And that was a huge, as you know, that was a big source of contention right before you took office. I know you're going through your accomplishments, but I am curious why it ended up making it past the finish line when in 2014 there was so much opposition to it, primarily, I would say, from labor unions that wanted an apprenticeship requirement on it. How did it make it this time?
Well, the last time, it really wasn't a matter of outside forces that were opposing it. It was really internal to the council. And then we had, of course, Charlie Dooley was the county executive, and it became a campaign issue. And we had made a proposal for a bill that was a minority inclusion bill. And frankly, I think that it was a political matter. I don't think that Charlie and then allies of his on the council wanted to see that bill move forward at that time, because it would have been something that I would have been able to, I think they saw it as something that I would have been able to claim in my election as I ran against him. So I think it really missed for, the basic political situation at the time.
Okay, so all that's set up with a number of legitimate accomplishments or things that have happened during your term.
Yeah, I also have to mention pension reform because that's a huge one.
Yes.
And you've got places like Illinois where the pensions are frankly driving the state and the governments into bankruptcy and the pension systems themselves. And we were able to reform our pension system and save $300 million and ensure pensions for our public employees.
Okay, but with all that set
That,
up,
of course, they've paid into.
and I mean, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. You are facing a primary opponent. I mean, there really isn't. I mean, there isn't a well-known Republican running, but you do have a primary opponent in Mark Mantovani. He has gotten the endorsements of some, particularly mid-county Democratic organizations. Hazel Irby, who is the number 2 person on the county council, has endorsed him. Probably there's been several other African Americans. I covered the news conference several weeks ago who have endorsed him. Mm-hmm. Some of this may have been left over from the Dooley contest, but still, the bottom line is that the Democratic Party in the county is not totally. I mean, they're not totally behind you, and there is this seems to be very historic tensions between you and many of the Democrats on the county council. In fact, there's only one that you can rely on as a reliable vote. I mean, why do you think all that has come into play, and how do you think that, I mean, how do you see it going into August?
I think what you're looking at and the way I see it, I think that this is the reality of the situation. You know, all of the things that I've mentioned that are accomplishments, we have done with an acrimonious relationship with the council. And we have still moved forward an agenda that is very much focused on benefits and the benefit to our community. And that's it. I mean, that's the primary focus. That's a hard agenda to argue with. You know, when you start talking about an opioid epidemic and responding to that opioid epidemic and trying to save the lives of the members of our community, the brothers and the sisters and the fathers and the mothers of the members of our community, that's a hard proposition to argue with. So you tend to be able to move those things forward and advance those things. That's our agenda. Our agenda is an agenda. My agenda is an agenda of the people. So some of the things that you're talking about are inside politics. When you start talking about some of the Democratic organizations that you've talked about are Democratic townships.
I mean, why are they endorsing him when you've got a record like this? I mean, if you're looking at it.
Because it's primarily those that have sought to obstruct us moving forward.
Why?
And inside politics. Well, you know, you've got you just have a leftover group of individuals from the time that I defeated Charlie Dooley, and those individuals are political people, and a lot of this is just inside baseball and inside politics. Now, if you look at my endorsements are in fact real endorsements. They're not stilted endorsements, which is what he's receiving. My real endorsements are St. Louis Labor Council endorsed me, which is basically the umbrella organization for every labor union, virtually every labor union in St. Louis County and in our region. The carpenters have endorsed me. The building trades have endorsed me. Firefighters, Local 265 has endorsed me. The St. Louis County Police, FOP, have endorsed me. And these are just, some of the short list of the long list. Those are important endorsements, and those are not stilted endorsements. Those are endorsements that actually have individuals and groups behind them. And the endorsements that I think you've seen that are coming from him are endorsements that are less than that, and they're really inside politics endorsements. And it's important because you've said, that these individuals have endorsed him. I'm running against someone who's claiming to be a Democrat, and this is an individual who gave $20,000 plus to Eric Greitens in the last cycle in 2016.
You said he was one of the largest donors, right?
About the 70th largest donor of Eric Greitens.
Isn't that kind of a misleading thing to say, though, when Eric Greitens took $1 million donations and comparing it to $20,000? I'm not saying $20,000 isn't a lot of money, but isn't that kind of overstating it a little bit?
Numerically, if we've calculated it correctly, he's about Eric Greitens' 70th donor. And when you talk to I would encourage you to do this.
Sure.
Talk to individuals in St. Louis County and talk to someone who makes $40,000 a year and you ask them if a $20,000 donation to Eric Greitens is a large donation.
It is.
And I will guarantee you that those individuals will say.
But this gets to a larger point.
That means that you didn't just. This is the importance of it, though.
Sure.
Okay.
The importance of it is this: you didn't just throw $250 at Eric Greitens. You invested $20,000 for some reason because you believed in his candidacy and you believed in his platform. And let's just talk. Let's talk about his platform.
And Mantovani acknowledges that.
Well, I think it requires more than acknowledgement, though, because think about what Eric Greitens ran on. Now, philosophically, I'm not arguing about it. I'm just saying, if you're in a Democratic primary and you're supporting this gentleman who said that his number one priority was to make Missouri a right-to-work state, that is not a Democratic principle that's going to get you in the door. And in fact, it's frankly a disqualifier. It really is. And you think about all of the other platforms, the other pieces of his platform were all very right, very Republican platform. This isn't a situation where you could have been fooled, and that's essentially what Mantovani has claimed, that he was fooled. There was nothing tricky about what Eric Greitens was saying in just 2016. But you also have to keep this in mind. He gave his last installment just 9 months before declaring a candidacy against me, seeking the Democratic nomination of St. Louis County for county executive.
But this is a broader philosophical question. I certainly understand why you're bringing this up, and frankly, Mantovani deserves scrutiny for that for the reason you just mentioned. But you and I both know that county council and county government party affiliation has, I would argue, very little to do with how the county runs. Well, so why does it matter if he is a Republican or a Democrat? And shouldn't it be more on whether he can run the county or not?
And I disagree with you greatly. I think that party affiliation is important because I think with party affiliation, you understand where a person's coming from and you understand what are going to be the planks of his platform. It's not just that he gave $20,000 to Eric Greitens. I supported President Barack Obama. I ran on the ticket with him 2 times, and I was very, very proud to do that. While I was running on a ticket with Barack Obama of the same party, my opponent gave to President Obama's Republican opponents in both races in 2008 and in 2012. Mantovani supported Rudy Giuliani for president in 2008 by giving him money, and then supported John Huntsman for president in 2012. And coincidentally, both of these gentlemen now work for President Trump. One is his lawyer and one is an ambassador. And you look at the other Republicans that he gave to, it just isn't simply Eric Greitens, and it's not just opposing Barack Obama. It becomes, I think, very important to understand where anyone can say anything. I mean, Mark Mantovani can sit on your show and say that he's for all of these democratic principles.
Yeah.
But in fact, you look at the history of what he's given to and who he's given to and who he has supported. I mean, in just 2017 in February, he would not say who he supported in the Clinton-Trump race. He wouldn't say that he didn't vote for Donald Trump.
But the broader issue, I think, though, is he hasn't run for office before. So is there, I mean, if I were you, I mean, would you be honing in maybe more on whether or not he knows how to run county council or knows how to run the county, knows how to make sure that there's waste management contracts?
Yeah, because, I mean, and to just piggyback on Joe's point, as a new county resident, I care about whether I'm getting county services. I care about whether the county roads are doing well. I care about whether the departments are operating well. And party affiliation has very little to do with that. So I know you just tried to answer my question, but I really don't feel like you answered it.
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Well,
I really don't think it does.
Well, I think it does matter when you look at something like how you're going to fix our pension system.
Okay.
I think that a Republican and a Democrat may have different approaches to how they fix that pension system. When you balance the budget, how do you balance the budget? Do you balance the budget on the backs of poor people? Do you balance the budget on the backs of the disadvantaged? Or do you try to have a different approach? And I think that there are going to be different approaches from a Democrat and a Republican, from someone on the right and someone on the left. And I think that's and I understand we all want those basic services delivered on time. But the question is, sometimes priorities have to be addressed when we're talking about even the basic delivery of services. Getting your trash there on time might require a budget cut somewhere. And where's that budget cut going to come from? We've seen in the state level of government. I mean, you have basic services being delivered by the state as well. But we understand that, look at Medicaid cuts and look at the failure to expand Medicaid. Well, there's a reason for that, because there's a party approach to that. And there is a definite party affiliation difference. And the same thing applies in county government as well.
Do you think, aside from the question of whether or not because it used to be people would, well, they still do, they attack career politicians. But then the other hand, we've had a string of business people up from the Washington on down. They don't always know how to run government.
Yeah, and we can talk about that as well.
And I posed that question to Mantovani pretty sharply, but I'd like to hear your opinion
one of the things I would say is let's look at history and look at recent history. We have a president who had no experience in government, and I would say that for those of us who are Democrats, I don't think we see that working out very well. And we have a governor who had no previous experience in government, and I don't think that Democrats and probably a lot of Republicans see that working out very well either. So I think that experience does matter. I was on the St. Louis County Council for 6 years prior to being county executive, and I am the current county executive, and I've been, I think, running the government extraordinarily well for the last 3.5 years, and I've been doing so with democratic principles in my heart and in my mind.
Well, do you think Republicans are secretly helping Mantovani?
I'll tell you this. I don't think that there is. I don't think he's receiving perhaps what he wants, but I do believe that he is receiving help from Republicans. I think that this is in part. I think Republicans have realized that they are not going to win in a general election for county executive because our county has trended so far to the Democratic. And I believe that Mark Mantovani represents an individual who is receiving support from the Republicans because they don't believe that he can win in the general. So they're helping him in the primary. And that bears itself out really with his contributors. Dave Spence, a very much a right to work governor candidate from the past, has given him, at least $10,000. And if you look at many of his donors, they're of that ilk. So yes, I do believe that he is receiving support from Republicans, but if you look at his fundraising, he has given himself $1 million, at least $1 million, actually over $1 million. And he's had, I think he's not been a prolific fundraiser. In fact, I think he's been a somewhat ineffective fundraiser, which is why he's had to fund most of his campaign. But the money that he did receive was actually from Republicans, much of it.
I wanted you to respond to a couple of points that he made on our podcast. The first is actually the second clip that I have on the playlist, where he talks about your aforementioned relationship with the St. Louis County Council. I'm going to play this clip and then use this as a springboard for discussion.
Clearly, the current occupant of the office relationships with the county council is beyond challenged, right? It's wholly dysfunctional, right? Which I think is ironic that you talk about how great it is to have people who are experienced in light of the fact that the relationship today is so totally dysfunctional with the county council. As a practical matter, I would aspire to having a very strong county council. I would wish to empower them. I'd wish to give them the resources they need to do their job better.
And keep in mind, the majority of this four-person coalition, the Sam Page, Rochelle Walton Gray, Hazel Irby, Ernie Trackus, most of them are Democrats. And for whatever reasons that they have been very, very, very critical of your leadership and your temperament, which I've asked you about many times, and I think it's going to be a problem even if you win re-election, because they're all still going to be there. And then you have the likely addition of Tim Fitch, who I could see just using his 4 years to attack you, potentially to run for county executive in 2022. So how is this situation going to get better if you're reelected? Because I don't see it getting better. I see it getting worse.
I would say this. I am elected not by the county council. I'm elected by the people of St. Louis County. And what I have done is done my very best to have an agenda that is for the people of St. Louis County. And that's an agenda. I mean, look at the things that I've talked about that we've accomplished despite the acrimony. And I would posit to you this. I think that anyone who occupies this office is going to have the same issues that I have had with the county council. Because if you have a true leader in this office, sometimes you have to say no. Mark Tucker the auditor candidate that they move forward, and that a majority, the same majority that you're talking about, brought him to be the county auditor. I opposed that. I opposed it because the charter requires 5 years of accounting experience, and he had none. And now we have an auditor who really hasn't completed. He just simply hasn't completed an audit in what I believe is now over a year. We haven't had an audit in St. Louis County. Now, we do have an annual audit, but that's done by an outside auditor. And we should have the benefit, the St. Louis Countyans should have the benefit of having an auditor that audits. And so that's something that I have opposed. And if that is indicative of a particular temperament, then I'd rather have that temperament than a temperament that is so conciliatory that I'm going to go along with something like that. I mean, the things that I have opposed have been things like, one of the council members trying to basically place an obstacle in front of redeveloping Jamestown Mall. Well, that's not going to work. The community wants to see Jamestown Mall rehabilitated. So I'm going to do everything I need to do, to get that done. And if it requires saying no to the council, then that's what I have to do. So I think that anyone who truly wishes to lead is going to have that type of acrimony. And I think that, this isn't about pointing fingers at anyone, but I think that this is just a natural consequence of where we are in politics. I mean, we have the same issue in the city. We have the same issue in Jackson County. We have the same issue in Kansas City. We're seeing more of a tension, for whatever reason, within our state and I think nationally, between the legislature and the executive branch. And I think it's just a natural consequence. And it's something I can deal with.
I will just say, though, your predecessor in St. Louis City, Lyda Cruson, has forged decent relationships with some alder people, especially in North City, where she got literally 5 or 10% of the vote. So I understand that there's different interests and they don't agree on everything. I know she's just vetoing the ward reduction thing, which I know the Black Caucus doesn't like. But it seems like she's done a reasonably effective job at working with her opposition, whereas, and maybe this isn't completely your fault. Maybe it's because the other council people don't like your agenda or whatnot. But you compare the two situations, it seems like you're in a worse position than her.
Well, I disagree with you on this part. Look at our agenda and look at what we've passed. I just gave you a very short list of what would be accomplishments for the people of St. Louis County. Those are things that we had to have move through the council, and they moved through the council. So I don't think, now we have encountered obstacles in every direction, as from the council, but we have passed those things. So once again, I think that seeing the acrimony perhaps could cause you to believe what you're thinking, but the results, I think, say otherwise.
Okay, because I'd like to shift a couple issues because we can get politically junky. I'm as bad as anybody. Okay, Northwest Plaza, which is kind of the big elephant in the room. That's the thing that Mantovani and others have been pointing to, in part because while everyone agrees that something needed to be done because it'd been pretty much emptied out, you did receive rather large, 6-figure campaign donations from the developers. And as a result, in fact, Irby said she returned some of the donations she got from them, even though she supported the redevelopment, just because she feared that politics played a role in it. Do you want to talk about, because it seems to really caused a split, even though everybody agrees something had to be done.
I will say this. Look at the result. First, let's look at the result. The result is a redeveloped Northwest Plaza. The county chose, it was by a 5-1 vote of the St. Louis County Council, we chose to do a 20-year lease to anchor ourselves there so that more redevelopment and further redevelopment could take place because we were a steady tenant. The plaza being redeveloped supports 2,500 jobs, over $250 million in economic activity. And, since we took office, that is a dramatic result in an area and in a mall that was once dilapidated, and it's now been redeveloped. Now, with respect to the campaign contributions, The campaign contributions are, once again, we have to remember, those are contributions to a campaign for reelection or for whatever it is, but it's reelection in my case. I'm not personally ingratiated by any of those campaign contributions. They're simply campaign contributions. I operate within the same system that everyone else operates. I have operated within that system lawfully and ethically. As you would look at my ethics commission record, it's unblemished. And, it has been, once again, a positive development for our community, independent of those contributions. And if you look at the lease that was entered into, the lease that we entered into is very similar to the leases that the other corporate interests that have chosen Northwest Plaza. It's very similar to those leases. The lease is, I think, currently at about $18 a square foot with all charges included, which is right at the average for North County. So we have an average lease space rate, and we have an extraordinary space. We have Class A office space at Northwest Plaza, and that office space is not just used for our employees, but it's where our citizens transact their business for all of the departments in St. Louis County right there. So it is, once again, it's a great benefit to our community. It's been a great benefit to the surrounding area, and it was done so very much independent of any campaign contributions. It was the very best spot that we could find. There was a competitive process. Many properties were looked at. This was the best for price and location and all of the amenities that our citizens require to transact their business.
But what about, okay, there's leases that the county is still paying on now for buildings where you're not at because people have moved into Northwest Plaza. And in fact, Tracus, the councilman from your old district, is, been calling for trying to lead some sort of investigation into these leases.
Yeah,
So,
and I'll tell you, with respect to the other leases, when we relocated all of our facilities, and you have to understand, we're a county of 520 square miles, roughly. We have facilities everywhere, and we had leases that were, frankly, all over the place. So we did our very best to bring all those leases to a common point, but we didn't enter into those leases. Those leases existed before I came. So in some cases, we had very small overlap, like of months, where we had to get out of one lease and move into Northwest Plaza. Currently, we only have one lease space, and only one, that was unoccupied for some time, but it was largely unoccupied because it was uninhabitable. We've rehabbed that space, and that space is going to be used. I mean, you have to remember, we have so many facilities, and we have spatial needs already, and that were current, that we needed to fill. And we're filling that with some basic services to the community, and most importantly, a police precinct that is going to house a new police unit from Proposition P, and we're going to be announcing that in the weeks to come. So that space will not only be occupied, but it will be a space that is of the highest use, and I think a great investment for North St. Louis County.
I do want you to respond, though, to what Mantovani said about this, because I feel like this is going to come up during the campaign over the next few months, and he made some pretty serious charges and accusations toward you, which I feel like you deserve to respond to.
If it's demonstrable that the leases in Northwest Plaza were a consequence of illegal activity, bribery, and the like, I believe those leases are voidable. You can't profit from illegal activity.
Is that what you're alleging? Do you think that the county executive took bribes for that to happen?
I clearly believe there's a pay-for-play relationship here. Absolutely, I do. Yeah. You don't? You think that $375,000 is
I'm not
just
saying you don't, but that's a serious allegation. And
do you think that the Circuit Attorney Bob McCullough should be investigating?
Or Prosecutor Bob McCullough.
Prosecutor. I apologize. Prosecutor Bob McCullough.
Of course this should be investigated. Of course. I mean, it's written about, it's talked about. Everybody in the community talks about this. People laugh about it. They call it the Glarner Mall. Of course this should be investigated.
What's your response?
Some of his comments aren't really even, I think they're below responding to. And I think what he needs to keep in mind is that I'm a public figure, and he has certain protections, against me. but he's also talking about private individuals. As I said before, I operate within the same system that everyone else operates within, and that is public campaign contributions. All of the contributions that I received were reported properly and openly, and I've discussed them with the news media, and I've discussed them frankly with anybody who wants to talk about them, and I'll talk about them in any depth that you would like to talk about them in. But I think that it makes for a great campaign issue for him, or so he thinks.
Yeah.
And it gives him something to talk about in his campaign. Beyond that, I think you just have to look at what the benefit is to the community, and you have to understand that these are frankly, they're publicly reported campaign contributions that do not personally ingratiate me. They go to a campaign fund, which is separate and apart from any other fund, and it's just used for reelection.
As much as I would want to just go back to the back and forth, I do want to use the rest of the show to delve into some issues.
Yeah.
And in particular, and this is something I asked you before, and this is something I asked Mantovani. We've been talking about city-county merger, reunification, or whatever you want to call it for years. It was an issue during your first campaign. It seems like the process is getting more serious because Better Together is doing kind of town halls about what the future St. Louis and St. Louis County want to be. Since I asked Mantovani that, I want to ask you, what is kind of your philosophy on that issue, which may become less philosophical and more real in your second term?
Yeah, well, some months ago, I endorsed a study that Better Together was and is conducting, led by 3 civic leaders. The leader of that group is Suzanne Sitherwood from Spire. And it's a study that is basically looking at the approximately $700 million to $1 billion that is essentially being wasted on a yearly basis because of our fragmented government.
Because of duplication?
It's multiple things. It's duplication. It's fragmentation. It's multiple layers of government, which sort of goes to duplication as well. And I endorse that study because I think the conversation is very serious. And what will come from this study is very much needed data and a menu of options and sort of options in degree as to how far we want to go and exactly what we want to do as a community to address this potential billion-dollar cost issue. So I think it's very important in that respect. I do believe, though, that at this point, it's highly premature to have one particular method as to how you want, to see this go forward. I think that when Mantovani was on your show, I think, or on your podcast, excuse me.
You could call it a show. I don't care. I'm not offended either way, but continue.
Sure.
It's probably an
I don't
honor
know. I don't want to
call it a
offend
show.
anyone. I don't want to offend anyone.
I'm super offended by that, but I'm
It's
sorry.
probably an honor.
I'm sorry. We needed a little bit of a light after the serious question, but continue.
No, I appreciate your questions very much. But I think that it's far too premature to, he was suggesting that you make St. Louis County St. Louis City, just another municipality of St. Louis County. And there are a host of issues that come along with that. And I think that you need to look at that. And it's not just, you can't make such an important decision. And I think this comes from some of that lack of experience that we talked about in government. You can't make that kind of a decision as a campaign, essentially a campaign slogan or a campaign idea. It's far beyond that. There are many impacts governmentally. We have a budget in St. Louis County that is extraordinarily tight. I mean, it's tight. And whatever decision we make, it has to be a decision where there's essentially a multiplier and not a detractor and not a subtraction that occurs. So I think, it's really important that the study is completed, and it's really important that we look at that. As I said when I first ran, quantitatively and qualitatively. It's extremely important. So I think we're far from having one solution at this moment, but I think we need to look at this menu of options and make the best decision with our community, and it has to be a deliberative decision.
Now, I'm going to come back to the council business just briefly because there's an issue that's looming that I kind of covered a lot over the last few months, and Jason's covered it some as well. This has to do with Prop P, who got the raises and who didn't. I mean, I'm going to simplify it, but the bottom line is, while it did go to police, it also went to some support personnel.
Yes.
So you've got some situations, because I've been listening to the public comment period at council meetings for months.
Sure.
Okay. Since that, in some cases, you would have people who sit next to each other. One person would get the 16% raise. The other person, at least the way they were describing it, doing the same job but maybe having a slightly different job classification, didn't. Then you had the nurses, which are these nurses that serve the prisoners in the Justice Center. And while technically they're employed by the health department, I think the council ended up using some Prop P money to give them the raises. They've been beefing about this for months. You have now vetoed that.
I don't think it's a veto, but you basically said that this law is unenforceable and you're not going to do it.
Right. So here's my question, because I was at the council meeting where you told the nurses, point blank, that you were going to, and you've encouraged Councilwoman Irby to come up with a bill. Mm-hmm. And you said, you were willing to solve this. You really understood their situation. So can you explain kind of what your stance is now and what are you going to do about it?
Joe, first, you did a great job of explaining something that is extraordinarily complex. And
She's
really,
very good
I mean,
at that.
it really is, and you got it. Yeah, I did, and I meant it, and I followed through on what I promised. I presented the council presented me with a bill that I believe is unenforceable. And
now, this is using Prop P money.
That's right. And we made a promise to voters with respect to Prop P, and that we promised that we would utilize the money on police and public safety. And one of the issues that we have with what was proposed by the council is that we have a charter provision, and we have provisions in the law of St. Louis County in our ordinances that basically provide that if you have health workers have to be paid out of the health fund. So what the council basically did is said, we'll provide Prop P funds to the health fund, and then it'll be somehow cleansed or it kind of almost laundered. And I think that's inappropriate. I don't think you can do that. So now you have to understand, this isn't Steve Stenger versus the council, as many of these issues aren't, and we talked about that acrimony. This is Steve Stenger and a whole lot of people in our community. Frankly, the business community that supported the passage of Prop P thinks this is a terrible idea. The FOP, which is the police union,
I was just going to say,
they also believe that this is a terrible idea. So this isn't Steve Stenger. This is Steve Stenger representing the public. And I think if you talk to the public about how they feel about the utilization of Proposition P money in this way, I don't think they would be very happy about it. You talked about Tim Fitch previously.
Yeah.
Well,
the former police chief.
Yeah, former police chief. Tim Fitch has taken a very clear position on this, that he doesn't think that it's appropriate either. So this isn't just me. This is a situation where we have, and I said this to Colleen Wassinger the other night, Councilwoman Wassinger. I said, I respectfully disagree with your position. I think reasonable minds can differ. But this is one where I'm going to have to stick to my guns. And I made a promise to the people of St. Louis County about Prop P, and I don't want to violate that.
But you also made a promise to the nurses to get them the money. So how are you going to do that?
Well, I did, and I have provided the method and the means to do that. I presented the council with two separate bills. One bill provides Proposition P funds for the correction workers, and the other provides health funds for the nurses in the exact amounts that the council asked for the raises, because I truly believe in my heart that they deserve the raise. I really do. But it can't be taken from Prop P, and that health fund has, I said the other night, it was about 12 to 15 million. I think it's closer to 15 million in that fund. And we are making changes to our health department and making it much more efficient than it was in the past. We've already made dramatic changes, and we will be able to support those raises through the health fund.
Isn't the problem, though, that public safety wasn't defined strictly enough in Prop P? That's been a common criticism of people, even likely Councilman Fitch, that it should have been defined more tightly.
I think that the debate that we're having in the council right now is a healthy debate. I think that the people of St. Louis County elected the council, and the people of St. Louis County elected me, and they elected us to make these types of decisions. And hey, look, we've talked a lot about, attention that's between the executive branch and the legislative branch. I think some of that is because we're in a transformational period right now in St. Louis County, and we have a lot of different directions that we could go. And I think that's sensed probably by the council. It's sensed by me. And we have a very healthy, and I think it's healthy, it's part of democracy. If we always agreed, think about what you'd be asking me today. You'd be saying, hey, the council agrees with you 90% of the time. Yeah. Don't you think that we need a divergence of opinion? Yeah. I think you'd be saying that to me.
You're very likely.
But you would. I think you'd say, and Stenger has control of the council, and he's doing these things. You would.
Yeah, it would be. And it was at the beginning of your term when you had more people.
Right. So I get it both ways. I don't know what to say.
To be fair, I mean, one thing I do want to make clear to our listeners, and I did a feature on this a couple months ago, talking about the acrimony of council, but pointing out that the county executive has far more powers than the mayor of the city of St. Louis. So in other words, you can veto stuff more. You have more control over the budget, which means you have more power, but then also gives you more responsibility, and you're a bigger target to get slapped
absolutely.
at.
Well, I think that's just a feature of leadership. It's why when you take the job, and my wife has asked me, are you sure you want to run again? She's asked me that question, and she very much supports my run. But she's asked me, you as a leader, you take a lot of hits. Look at Northwest Plaza, and I talked about the tremendous results that we've seen for the community. We're going to take hits, and you just take those hits, and there's going to be something to say about everything. For Northwest Plaza, it's campaign contributions. For some other matter, it's going to be something else, and we just have to deal with those issues, and you move on.
All right, in the last few minutes, I want to deal.
I got two questions I want to ask, but go ahead.
Okay, because I want to go. I want to go through these charter amendments that you have vetoed, because and we've talked about these on previous shows.
Sure.
One of them involves a legal counsel for the county council, which they're not allowed to have under the charter. You vetoed that. There's another that effectively involves allowing council members to have independent contracting arrangements with local governments. I'm describing it very generally. You vetoed that. And you told us before the show you vetoed one establishing campaign contribution limits as well.
In fact, that was one of my questions.
Well, there you go, Joe.
We're on the common page.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the campaign contribution
I would love
first.
to.
So with respect to the campaign contribution, and it does much more than that, and that's part of the problem.
I agree.
Okay. So campaign contribution limits. I can tell you that I have disdain for our system, and I said, previously I operate within the same system that everybody operates within. I got to tell you, it's a miserable system, and I think for any public servant, I've not known one that likes to pick up the phone and ask someone for money for their reelection effort. It's just for their election effort. It's tough. It's very difficult. It's uncomfortable, and no one really likes to do it. To have $2,600 limits, I think is a great idea. Okay.
Well, that's the state limit, and that's for the state offices, and also for the legislative offices.
But not for county or municipal offices.
Correct.
But the problem, one of the problems with the bill, is that it doesn't address the system of the candidate who can give himself or herself unlimited amounts of money. So that to me is it's a big issue.
But the U.S. Supreme Court ruled several decades ago, because this came up, that you cannot bar people from putting in their own money.
Well, I think it has to address the issue in some way. And we're just talking about a bare $2,600 limit that's placed on it. If you look at the state law, that's similar. The state law is much more comprehensive than the law that's been proposed by the county council.
There's been so many end arounds that law, I told Hazel Irby, I'll tell you now, if that becomes law, people will find end arounds that.
It just doesn't provide. And I just mentioned that as one issue. The self-funder issue. You've also got every other way that you can get around that law. What it's going to do is just basically create for any candidate who wants to run for county executive or some other office, end arounds around it, not the least of which is something that I think I heard the evil genius, or maybe just the intelligent genius, Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm going to play that right now. I was talking with Councilman Sam Page about this issue. So on the last podcast, I talked about the admittingly not super likely scenario under the current Amendment 2 system that people would give you a lot of money and then you would essentially become a conduit for independent expenditures, which has actually happened on a smaller scale. I want to just mention that. But this was a problem that I see with
it's legal. We
it
want
is
to
legal.
make this clear.
It's legal. This is a problem that I foresee with this particular charter amendment. This is my question to Sam Page. Is there anything stopping a candidate for county council or county executive from saying, I'm running for, let's say, Creveport mayor, raising $1 million from that, and then switching over or using that money as independent expenditures for a county race under this amendment?
I am sure that very bright people will try and find a way to undermine the intent of this amendment, but I think it's the right next step.
So the answer is yes. Someone could do that.
I cannot answer your question. I cannot imagine all the hypothetical end-runs around campaign contribution limits. We've seen them at the state level, we've seen them at the federal level, and we've seen some that we never imagined, and I can't possibly anticipate all of those. But I do think that the proposal that we hope to place before the voters is the right first step.
Okay.
Now,
and it will bring us in line with state government.
Now, Jason's sitting here like the bird who ate the canary, or the cat who ate the canary. Sorry, I like cats, but because this was an issue that arose with the statewide limits, although the Missouri Ethics Commission said you can't do that. But with the county proposal, the Ethics Commission wouldn't be the one governing this,
Or the
correct?
more likely scenario is they would use one of those city or municipal committees, raise a lot of money, ship it to a PAC or 501c4. And this would likely only happen for county executive races. Mm-hmm. You don't need to spend $2 million in county council races. But that's just one of many ways you could get around this, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and so I just think placing that as a charter amendment that basically can't be modified except by another charter amendment, I think that is just a mistake. I think you have to have a comprehensive bill. You have to have a comprehensive law that at least seeks to avoid some of those scenarios. So I can't support it. But I will tell you this. The bill has another aspect of it that is really somewhat misleading from what the title of the proposal actually is. And that is it essentially gives the county council unbridled authority to make modifications and changes and deletions and omissions and additions and subtractions and even transfers of appropriated funds. And that is something that this proposal seeks to do in complete violation of the separation of powers that is basically set forth in our state constitution and is just part of our democracy, essentially giving one branch of government total authority over this particular area. Currently, I can make certain requests of the council, and they can either turn it up or turn it down. But this would give the council, it completely eliminates the executive branch from the equation and just gives all of that decision-making authority to the county council, which I think is extremely dangerous from a taxpayer overwatch perspective.
Well, wouldn't this also generate legal fights? Because there have been court cases in the past just on the basis that there's too many different things in one bill. In other words, that this is advertised as one thing, and then you've got something totally unrelated stuck in it. I've seen that in Jeff City a million times, where then the bill gets tossed out.
Joe, I think you're right, and I don't think that the bill would survive legal challenge on that basis. We'll see. I don't know, how that'll move forward, but that is one that I felt compelled to veto because of those issues that I've talked about.
All right, final.
And that's once again a disagreement with the council.
Not the final question.
Not my final question.
But one I think is a good one.
Zoo tax. It's on the ballot in November. What's your thought on it?
Well, I am very much in favor of putting it on the ballot and letting our citizens decide that important issue. And I think that if it were to move forward, I think that it could have some exciting impacts on our county. I mean, you're talking about a development that would occur in North County, which desperately needs that type of development. It's right there in the Spanish Lake area, and it could really use, that area of unincorporated North St. Louis County really could use a shot in the arm, and it's something that, as I've said, as I pointed to some of the things that we've been trying to redevelop in North St. Louis County, Northwest Plaza, Jamestown Mall, those are things that are really important, and this is another one that could be really important for the area.
Yeah, I mean, because basically the pipe fitters, correct, would be selling a lot of their property to the zoo. I mean,
Yeah.
and that would be used for like some sort of safari thing.
Yes.
Did it surprise you that, I mean, because there was this big debate over in South County for quite a while about what to do with Grant's Farm, if that might end up being with the zoo. Now that may not, so since they're doing this. Any thoughts about whether or not, with all this stuff going on, that it's time to ask some of the other counties' residents to pony up admissions?
You read my mind, Joe. What do you think?
As a general policy matter, I'm going to leave that up to the people of St. Louis County to decide how they feel about that. I can only speak to it from the perspective of I really want to see something good happen, and we've seen good things happen in North County. We've got, as I talked about, we have North Park. That's a North County development. We've got great things happening at Boeing. And these are all things that my administration has supported. We've got Jamestown Mall that's on the cusp of being redeveloped right now. There's a developer that's interested that responded to the RFP that wants to put basically 600 new jobs there, a training center for locals. There's a minority inclusion piece for the build out, and they want to make a tens of millions of dollar investment in North County right there at Jamestown Mall, which is incredible for North County once again. When I see something like this breeding facility and the safari facility, I can't help but be excited for it and think that it's that it's a good idea.
Now, I want to shift. Well, this is my final question.
All right.
Okay, because I just came from Jefferson City, where last week, among the things that the General Assembly did was move the right to work referendum from November to August.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that the Republican leaders didn't have this in mind, but I have a theory that actually, while they wanted to not use the referendum to help Democrats on the general election ballot, notably U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, my theory is, while this was unintended, if it's on the August ballot, it actually could make the right to work referendum a key issue in your primary contest with Mantovani. I'm just curious to see, A, how you see it. Is it something that might help you since you have all this union support, or might it make it so that the issue is bigger than the contest and the other matters that you were talking about?
I come from a long line of union members. My dad was a CWA union lineman for Bell and then AT&T. I saw firsthand what my father's union job did for our family. My grandfather was a union electrician for the railroad. My grandfather's father was a union railroadman. So my family is, a family that, comes home from work with their work, essentially on them. And my dad did that for 42 years at Bell. So I consider union members my brothers and sisters. And when I see them in a plight like the one that they're in, I want to help. And, if that fight is on in August, I can tell you I'm going to fight like hell to do everything I can to defeat, Proposition A and to keep right to work, away from Missouri. I think it's a big mistake. Do I think that could help my election? Look, these are people that I have a lot of camaraderie with, and people that these are not just supporters. These are people that, like I said, I'm with 100%, and these are individuals that I consider quite literally brothers and sisters. So are we going to fight in the trenches together? Yeah, I think so. So I think that for anyone challenging me in this race, I think they're going to have a problem.
And this is actually an issue that does affect county government, because oftentimes labor unions are part of construction contracts.
It does. And I got to tell you, when we have union members doing the work, it's done once. It's done on time. It's done well. We have we have a phenomenal workforce in the state of Missouri, and a big reason for that is union training and all of the requirements that they place upon their workers, and the great wages that they earn, and the workers that they're able to attract to do those jobs are excellent. I mean, you can just look at the Centene project. You know, just look at the Pfizer project. You know, look at the projects that we have in St. Louis County that are built by union members. They're done well and on time.
Now, running the county with the General Assembly has now gone after the prevailing wage, also against project labor agreements. Does that affect how you deal with labor unions when you're dealing with these major contracts?
You know, no, I think that what we have is we have a process in St. Louis County where we have Are you talking about the actual procurement process?
Well, the fact that now, I mean, because some of these used to be part of the thinking as far as what the wage would be, or what sort of how the contractor was going to be dealing with the subcontractors. Does this the changes in state law affect you? I guess that's probably a better way of putting it.
Well, I don't know if they affect the actual operations of government, but I can tell you they impact me personally, because I think that my focus is on what it does to the worker. And you know, when you're talking about a family that's earning, you know, $20 some odd an hour versus $8 an hour for doing the same job, that's a different family, and that's a different experience, and that's a different life experience. So that's what I focus on.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what your favorite animal is at the St. Louis Zoo.
My favorite animal?
Because I've asked every other county official that question. So I feel like you deserve to. I think the people of St. Louis County deserve to know.
I got to be honest with you. You know, I like the penguins.
Okay.
You know, they're my favorite. They were, you know, they're my daughter's favorite as well.
Well, I mean, you sing on the side, and I could see where a lot of penguins together kind of remind one of a rock group or something.
What?
A singing group.
What are you talking about,
Joe? I don't know about that. I got to be honest.
Well, giraffes are my favorite.
And mine are the hippos, as I've said. On that note,
man.
Thank you so much for coming in today and talking about your reelection and your vision for the county. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
How would people follow you on Twitter or any other parts of the World Wide Web?
At Steve Stenger.
We'll be back next time. Until then, you will succeed.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.